morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Sorry for the late start today, but with the holiday weekend, we just found ourselves a little bit behind. So if you were with us yesterday, you know that we started in 2 Thessalonians in chapter 1, and we gave you the intro to that, a little bit different from what we see in the first book of Thessalonians. So we're going to pick right up here in verse 1, but picking up in verses 5 and 6 says this: "All this is evidence that God's judgment is right. And as a result, you will be counted worthy of the kingdom of God for which you are suffering. God is just. He will pay back trouble to those who trouble you and give relief to you who are troubled, and to us as well." So, good morning. I mean, here it is. We see this really nice push that we can count on God to be sovereign and our judge. And so, a couple of teaching points in this. First, we see that for the persecuted, and many of us feel that we are persecuted because of our faith. We don't know anything about persecution compared to some of these first century believers and the things that they were going through, and probably the mockery and things like that must have been happening here in Thessalonica with these, centuries old tradition ways of worshiping Greek gods. Now you have this new thing coming along. And even though they may have been receptive to the idea of a new God, we are seeing something different in the practice. And so there's all kinds of stuff that may have been happening. And so what Paul is telling is that for the people who really feel this persecution, that there is a hope of vindication. And this is speaking to a language that would have meant something to them. But what Paul is saying is that God being a just God is not a new thing. It's not new to this Christianity, but it's actually been something that has gone all the way back into the Old Testament and has been consistent through our knowledge of God, that God is a just God, and that he does judge things rightly. And so they can count on that. We do know that the Thessalonians did endure persecution, and that they would continue to endure some persecution, but we also know that they have confidence that God is going to judge. And that is what Paul is pushing on. He's like, look, I know times are tough. I know things are difficult, but you need to stay in this with the knowledge that God is going to see it through. Present circumstances, kind of like what we should all have to deal with, is not the final word. Whatever it is you're going through now is not the end result. I mean, it just isn't for those of us who call ourselves believers. He points out that their good works are evidence of their salvation and that God will honor those. He uses this term suffering, so we can rightly assume that they were struggling with some things. And the teaching point, I think, is that God is the one who avenges, not us. God is the one who resolves our conflicts, not us necessarily speaking. And that God's judgment is the consequence when we reject salvation. So that's really your teaching point today, is that God sits on the throne and that God is the one who's going to be your avenger. God is the one who is going to be your shield, so to speak. God is the one, if you call yourself a believer, if you are a believer, who sees what's happening, who will honor your suffering and have your back in the end. So what's the devotion? To me, the devotion is simple. It's right out of Genesis chapter 4, right after Cain has slain Abel. There's this crying out conversation that he has, and God really looks down on him and really kind of very sobers him up, and he says, look, at the end of the day, if you do what's right, will you not be accepted? And I think that's kind of the message that Paul is giving to the Thessalonians here. Hey guys, listen, hang in there. I know it's hard, but if you do what's right, will you not be accepted? So that's your devotion. Today, every day, do your best to do what is right. It's actually a philosophy of my ministry. If somebody comes into my office and has something to ask or say, I ask myself, what's the right thing? If somebody sends an email, what's the right thing? In dealing with conflict and consequences, I'm always asking myself, what is the right thing to do here? Because if I do what's right, I'm going to be accepted. And that's your devotion for the day. As always, guys, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you can be made aware every time we put out a new video. And go bless somebody else today. Go do something amazing for somebody else. Expect nothing in return. Watch what happens in your life. We'll see you tomorrow.